If you can't control your property, Derek, maybe you don't belong in this neighborhood. Vanessa Whitmore said it loud enough for 3 neighbors to hear while slapping a fluorescent orange HOA violation sticker across my garage door like she was marking condemned property. Rain hammered the metal roofs up and down our cul-de-sac. Cold February rain that turned the gravel driveways slick and dark under the gray Ohio sky. And behind me, inside my own garage, 17 months of her junk sat stacked wall to wall like a landfill she expected me to babysit forever. Wet cardboard, mildew, cheap perfume soaked into old fabric, broken lamps, plastic storage bins, an antique chair with one leg cracked clean through. Every inch of the workshop I'd spent 11 years building had disappeared under Vanessa Whitmore's mess while she stood there in a cream trench coat pretending I was the problem. "You've got until tomorrow morning," she said, voice calm, polished, almost cheerful, "or I start legal enforcement with the board." Across the street, old Marty Benson froze halfway through unloading groceries from his pickup truck. Even he looked uncomfortable. Nobody challenged Vanessa publicly in Blackwater Pines. Nobody. Not after what happened to the Reynolds family last summer. I looked at the violation notice in my hand. $250. Visual blight and improper storage conditions. Signed personally by Vanessa herself. I let out one slow breath into the cold morning air while rainwater dripped off the garage track beside me. "That your final decision?" I asked. She smiled the way bank managers smile before denying loans. "You created this situation, Derek." That almost made me laugh. Almost. Because every single item inside that garage belonged to her. By the next morning, strangers would carry nearly all of it away. But Vanessa Whitmore didn't know that yet. If somebody weaponized an HOA against you while storing their own junk on your property, what would you do? Comment below with your city and let me see where you're watching from tonight. Because this whole thing spiraled into county investigators, emergency board meetings, and one of the ugliest public meltdowns I've ever witnessed in suburban America. Now, to understand why Vanessa's voice shaking 3 weeks later felt so satisfying, you need to understand what that garage used to mean to me before she took it over. My name's Derek Holloway, 54, retired HVAC technician. Divorced 6 years ago after 28 years of marriage and one courtroom that smelled like burnt coffee and wet wool every time it rained outside the county courthouse downtown. After the divorce, that garage became the only place in my life that still made sense. Pegboard walls lined perfectly, socket sets organized by size, old cedar shelving I built with my father before he passed. On quiet mornings, especially when fog rolled low over Miller's Lake a mile west of the subdivision, I'd sit out there with black coffee in a steel thermos listening to rain tap against the roof while rebuilding old carburetors just to keep my hands busy. That garage wasn't storage space. It was recovery. Vanessa knew that too. That's what made what she did next feel personal. The first time she asked for temporary storage, she brought blueberry muffins and smiled like a church volunteer asking for a harmless favor. "Just a couple boxes for 2 weeks," she said. The remodel got delayed. 2 weeks turned into 17 months. Then came furniture, seasonal displays, framed artwork, inventory tags, folding tables, expensive staging pieces wrapped in plastic. My garage slowly stopped looking like a workshop and started looking like the back room of a failing furniture outlet. Every time I asked when she planned to move it, Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically like I was inconveniencing her by wanting my own property back. "You've always seemed like such a reasonable man, Derek." That phrase, reasonable man, around Blackwater Pines, that was code for stay quiet and absorb the abuse. And for a while I did. Until the morning she publicly threatened foreclosure standing in my driveway, while her garbage rotted inside my garage, and half the neighborhood watched from behind rain-speckled windows. That afternoon the rain finally broke, but the sky over Blackwater Pines stayed low and heavy like more trouble was waiting just past the tree line. Cold wind rolled in off Miller's Lake, carrying that damp cedar smell you only get near the shoreline after a storm, and I sat alone inside Rosie's Diner 3 miles outside town, watching courthouse traffic crawl through wet intersections while my coffee went cold beside me. Nobody bothered me there. Truckers, sheriff deputies, contractors coming off county jobs, everybody mostly kept to themselves. But even in that diner, I could feel the neighborhood fallout already spreading. 2 booths over, A couple from my subdivision stopped talking the second they noticed me. The woman gave me that uncomfortable half-smile people use when they think someone's life is quietly falling apart. That was Vanessa's real talent. Not fines, not bylaws, social pressure. She knew how to turn a neighborhood into a courtroom without anybody realizing the trial had started. My phone buzzed twice while rainwater slid down the front windows. First text came from Marty Benson across the street. "You okay?" Second came from someone anonymous. "Heard the HOA is putting a lien on your house." No greeting, no name, just fear wrapped in gossip. I stared at that message for a long moment because part of me understood exactly how people got steamrolled by someone like Vanessa Whitmore. It was exhausting fighting somebody who never looked emotional while she dismantled your reputation one quiet conversation at a time. By the time I drove back into Blackwater Pines near dusk, fog was already settling low across the retention pond behind the subdivision entrance, and porch lights glowed through mist like warning beacons. My gravel driveway crunched under the tires of my old Silverado, and the second I stepped out, I saw another violation notice tucked beneath my garage handle. Too fast. Vanessa had not even waited 12 hours. Improper vehicle fluid containment. I actually laughed under my breath reading that one because my truck had not leaked a drop in years. Then I noticed movement across the street. Vanessa stood under her porch awning holding a wine glass, watching me. Not hiding it either. Just calmly observing like she owned the outcome already. "You missed a spot near the gutter," she called across the street. "Some people still care about standards around here." Her tone stayed smooth, almost neighborly, but I caught the edge underneath it now. Irritation. She expected me embarrassed. Quiet. Compliant. Instead, I folded the violation notice in half and slid it into my jacket pocket without answering. That bothered her more than yelling would have. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened before she took another sip. The next morning, things escalated again. I walked out at 6:30 carrying my coffee thermos into 38-degree air and found two board members standing beside my garage with clipboards while Vanessa directed them like a foreman at a construction site. Fog drifted through the cul-de-sac slow and thick enough to blur the pine trees at the far end of the street. "Routine inspection," Vanessa said before I even spoke. Given the condition, concerns. One of the board members, Linda Harper, would not even look me in the eye. That told me everything. Vanessa had already started building her narrative behind closed doors. Dangerous homeowner. Non-compliant resident. Problem property. I unlocked the garage slowly, and the smell hit immediately. Wet cardboard. Mold. Dust trapped under old fabric. One of Vanessa's decorative storage bins had collapsed overnight, spilling paperwork across my workbench. Insurance forms. Vendor invoices. Inventory lists. Vanessa stepped forward too fast when she noticed them. Too fast for somebody unconcerned. "Do not touch those," she snapped. And for the first time since this whole mess started, her polished mask cracked in public. Just for a second. But Linda noticed it too. I saw her glance down at the invoices scattered across my father's cedar workbench. Then at the stacked furniture tags marked for commercial staging deliveries all across Franklin County. That was the moment the atmosphere shifted. Small, quiet, but real. Because suddenly Vanessa Whitmore did not look like a strict HOA president protecting neighborhood standards anymore. She looked like a woman hiding something inside my garage. The second Linda Harper saw those inventory tags, the entire mood inside my garage changed. Not loudly. Nobody gasped. Nobody accused Vanessa of anything. But tension settled into the room, like thunder pressure before a storm breaks over open water. Vanessa moved fast, scooping papers off my workbench while trying to recover her smile. But people notice desperation when they have seen confidence for years. "Client staging materials," she said lightly, brushing damp hair behind one ear. "Temporary overflow from my design consulting." Linda finally looked up at her. "I thought the board prohibited operating businesses out of residential properties." Silence. Just rainwater dripping outside the garage gutters and the distant hum of a school bus somewhere deeper in the subdivision. Vanessa answered too quickly. "It is not a business operation. It is occasional consulting." That word occasional hung in the air because the invoices scattered across my workbench told a different story. Delivery manifests. Furniture rental agreements. Inventory schedules covering half of Franklin County. Thousands of dollars moving through my garage while I paid HOA fines over the appearance of clutter she created herself. One of the other board members, Ted Mercer, shifted uncomfortably beside the tool chest. Ted sold insurance downtown and always acted like conflict physically hurt him. Maybe we should continue this another time, he muttered. Vanessa ignored him completely. Derek has been increasingly hostile about helping neighbors, she said calmly, redirecting the conversation with the ease of somebody used to controlling rooms. This situation has become emotional for him. Emotional. That word landed harder than the fines ever had. Because suddenly I understood the real strategy. She was not just occupying my property. She was building a version of me the neighborhood would stop trusting. Angry divorced guy? Difficult resident. Unstable homeowner. Once people believed that story, nothing else would matter. I looked around the garage at the stacked bins swallowing my father's cedar shelves, and for the first time since this started, I felt something underneath the anger. Fear. Quiet. Humiliating fear that maybe she could actually pull it off. Maybe Blackwater Pines would rather believe a polished HOA president than the middle-aged tradesman living alone at the edge of the subdivision. Vanessa saw that hesitation in my face too. Her confidence came rushing back immediately. I think we are done here, she said, already steering the board members toward the driveway. But then Ted stopped near the garage entrance. Why are there commercial delivery stickers from Columbus Home Staging Group? He asked softly. Vanessa froze for half a second. Barely noticeable, but enough. Old labels, she replied. They reuse containers. Ted nodded like he accepted the answer, but he did not sound convinced anymore. Neither did Linda. After they left, the neighborhood atmosphere turned strange fast. By lunchtime, pickup trucks slowed driving past my house. Curtains moved behind windows. Residents who usually waved avoided eye contact altogether. Around 4 that afternoon, Maria Donnelly from 2 streets over knocked quietly on my door, holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil, like somebody visiting a funeral home. You did not get this from me, she whispered before handing me a folded HOA newsletter. Inside was a highlighted section announcing an emergency compliance review hearing scheduled for Friday night. My name sat at the top. No warning. No prior notice. Just public review proceedings. Vanessa has already been talking to people, Maria said nervously, glancing back toward the street. She told everyone the board discovered hazardous storage conditions in your garage. Hazardous. I almost laughed again hearing that word surrounded by cardboard Christmas decorations and velvet dining chairs. But Maria did not look amused. People are scared she is going to start inspecting homes next, she admitted quietly. Nobody wants trouble. After she left, I sat alone in the garage listening to lake wind shake rain against the roof while fog drifted low beyond the backyard fence line. The place smelled less like my workshop every day. Less cedar, less motor oil, more mildew and fabric dust, and somebody else's control. Then I noticed one invoice still trapped beneath the leg of a broken staging table Vanessa missed while cleaning up. I pulled it free slowly. The billing address was not Vanessa's home. It was my address. My garage had been listed as an active commercial storage location for almost 11 months. Friday arrived under the kind of weather that makes small towns feel tense before anybody says a word. Low clouds pressed over Franklin County all morning, dark enough that headlights stayed on well past sunrise, and cold wind came rolling off Miller's Lake carrying damp fog across the subdivision in slow waves. I barely slept the night before. Every time rain tapped the roof over the garage, I kept picturing my father building those cedar shelves with me 20 years earlier, both of us standing in sawdust and radio static while Brown's football played softly in the background. Now half those shelves sat hidden behind Vanessa Whitmore's staging inventory, while my own address appeared on commercial invoices I never authorized. That realization changed something in me. Up until then, I had still been reacting emotionally, trying to survive the pressure. Friday morning was the first time I started thinking strategically. I drove downtown just after 8 with the invoice folded inside my jacket pocket and my coffee thermos rattling around the passenger seat beside old receipts and socket wrenches. County offices always smell the same in Ohio during winter. Wet coats, burnt coffee, papers soaked with decades of humidity. The clerk at the zoning counter looked about 60 and exhausted in a way only government employees manage after 30 years under fluorescent lights. I slid the invoice toward her quietly. Can somebody legally register commercial storage operations at a residential address without permission from the homeowner? She adjusted her glasses, scanned the document once, then looked up at me differently. Not casually anymore. Who owns the property? I do. Another pause. Has your homeowners association approved commercial inventory operations? I almost smiled hearing that question because suddenly the pressure was no longer sitting entirely on me. No, ma'am, I said calmly. I do not believe they know. The clerk leaned back slowly while thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the courthouse windows. Mr. Holloway, she said carefully, this could create insurance liability issues for every property adjacent to yours, depending on inventory classification. Adjacent properties. I had not even considered that yet. By the time I got back to Blackwater Pines near noon, the atmosphere had shifted again. People were outside despite the cold, watching, pretending not to watch. Two residents stopped talking when my truck rolled past. Somebody had already leaked details about the compliance hearing because neighbors suddenly treated my driveway like a crime scene. Vanessa stood near the community mailbox cluster speaking quietly with three homeowners while holding her umbrella perfectly steady against the wind. The second she saw my truck, her expression tightened almost invisibly. She knew something had changed too. Busy morning? She asked as I stepped out onto the wet pavement. Her tone stayed smooth but thinner now, stretched tighter underneath. Productive, I answered. That bothered her. I could tell immediately because Vanessa thrived on emotional imbalance. Calmness denied her leverage. One of the homeowners beside her, Carol Finley, shifted awkwardly before blurting out, "Is it true there are zoning issues connected to your garage?" Vanessa shot her a quick glance sharp enough to cut glass. Too late. The rumor had escaped containment already. I looked directly at Carol instead of Vanessa. I found out somebody registered commercial inventory under my home address without my consent. Silence hit the whole mailbox area. Even the lake wind seemed louder for a second. Carol blinked twice. Commercial, she repeated softly. Vanessa recovered fast. This is being exaggerated by someone under stress, she said smoothly. Derek has unfortunately become confused about temporary storage arrangements. Confused. There it was again. The subtle rewriting of reality. But this time people did not immediately nod along. Because now residents were doing mental math of their own. Insurance exposure. HOA liability. Property values. Potential lawsuits. You could practically hear the shift happening beneath the silence. That evening the compliance hearing filled nearly every folding chair inside the clubhouse. Rain hammered the roof hard enough to vibrate the fluorescent lights overhead while residents whispered in tight little groups that went silent whenever Vanessa walked past. Nobody looked relaxed anymore. Not even the board. Ted Mercer kept rubbing his wedding ring nervously while Linda Harper avoided Vanessa's eyes completely. Then I noticed something that finally made the entire situation feel dangerous for her instead of me. Vanessa had brought an attorney. The second I saw the attorney sitting beside Vanessa Whitmore at the front table, I understood this had moved beyond neighborhood intimidation. The clubhouse suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the air pressure changed before lightning hits open water. Rain hammered the roof overhead, while wet jackets steamed near the entrance and folding chairs creaked under the weight of nervous homeowners pretending they were not desperate to hear somebody else become the target tonight instead of them. Vanessa sat perfectly composed beneath fluorescent lights with a leather binder open beside her and her attorney angled just close enough to signal control without appearing aggressive. It was theater. Everything with Vanessa was theater. But she looked tired now. Not physically. Strategically. Like somebody carrying too many moving parts at once. The attorney introduced himself as Richard Barlow, Columbus Real Estate Counsel, voice smooth as polished granite. The board's concern tonight, he said carefully, is preserving community standards and ensuring no resident creates avoidable liability exposure. Liability exposure. Interesting choice of words considering what I learned downtown that morning. Around me, residents shifted uneasily. People had started whispering before the meeting even opened. I heard fragments while standing near the coffee urn and back. Commercial inventory. Insurance issues. Could affect everybody. Vanessa caused that herself by pushing too hard too fast. Fear spreads differently once homeowners think property values might get involved. Linda Harper called the meeting to order, but her voice lacked confidence now. Vanessa usually ran these hearings personally. Tonight she stayed quieter, letting the attorney speak while she observed the room like a politician measuring damage after a scandal breaks. Then Richard Barlow turned directly toward me. "Mr. Holloway, Are you denying the existence of substantial stored materials creating visual and safety concerns on your property? I could feel every eye in the room shift toward me at once. Rain rattled harder against the clubhouse windows. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled low across the lake. No, sir, I answered calmly. I am denying ownership of those materials. That landed harder than shouting ever could have. Even Ted Mercer looked up sharply. Richard folded his hands together. Then who owns them? Silence. Vanessa stared at me without blinking. I reached into my jacket slowly and placed the commercial invoice on the table in front of Linda Harper. According to this, I said quietly, the materials belong to a staging business operating under Vanessa Whitmore's direction. The room changed instantly. Not chaos. Worse. Stillness. Pure uncomfortable stillness. One homeowner near the back actually muttered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Vanessa leaned forward immediately. That document was taken out of context, she snapped, composure cracking faster this time. Temporary client overflow does not constitute commercial misuse. Richard Barlow turned toward her slightly. Tiny movement, but enough. Attorneys hate surprises in public meetings. I recognized that expression from divorce court years earlier. The look professionals get when clients stop being manageable. Linda Harper picked up the invoice carefully. This address is listed as active inventory storage, she read aloud. Ted rubbed his forehead hard enough to redden the skin. Vanessa, did the board approve this? Vanessa's smile returned too quickly. The board did not need approval because this was informal. Informal. Another bad word choice. Because now homeowners were connecting dots she could not control anymore. If she bypassed HOA rules herself, what else had she manipulated? Carol Finley stood up near the back row, clutching her purse tightly. You find him over clutter you caused? More whispers spread instantly through the room. Nobody sounded scared anymore. Confused, yes. Angry, definitely. But fear was shifting directions now. Vanessa sensed it too. You could practically watch her recalculating in real time while rainwater streaked down the clubhouse windows behind her. Then Richard Barlow quietly asked the one question that finally put real strain into her face. Vanessa, he said carefully, did you disclose this storage arrangement to the association's insurance carrier? She did not answer immediately. And in that silence, every resident in Blackwater Pines realized the situation might be much worse than a petty HOA dispute. Because if the association itself had undisclosed commercial exposure tied to a board president secretly operating through another homeowner's property, then this entire neighborhood had been standing in legal risk for almost a year without knowing it. Vanessa finally answered Richard Barlow about 6 seconds too late. The association was not exposed to any meaningful risk, she said carefully, but the confidence was gone now. Completely gone. You could hear it in the way her voice tightened around certain words, like somebody trying to hold together cracked glass before the whole thing shattered publicly. Around the clubhouse, homeowners stopped whispering and started watching her directly. That was new. Blackwater Pines had spent years looking away from Vanessa Whitmore because fear made avoidance easier than confrontation. But once people suspect the person controlling them might also be lying to them, the entire social structure starts shifting underneath their feet. Richard Barlow leaned closer to her and lowered his voice, though not low enough. Did the carrier know inventory was being stored off-book through another property owner? Vanessa's jaw flexed once. No answer again. Ted Mercer exhaled hard through his nose and stood up from the board table altogether. We need a recess. Nobody objected. Residents immediately broke into clusters around the room while thunder rolled outside over the lake and rainwater streaked sideways against the clubhouse windows. I stayed seated near the back wall beside the stale coffee station, strangely calm now. For the first time since this nightmare started, I no longer felt cornered. Vanessa did. Linda Harper approached quietly, holding the invoice with both hands like it might explode. Derek, she said carefully, how long has this inventory been stored at your property? About 11 months officially. Longer unofficially. Her face tightened. Why did you not report it earlier? That question hit harder than I expected because the honest answer sounded pathetic out loud. I looked past her through the rain-blurred windows toward the dark shoreline behind the clubhouse where fog drifted low across the water. Because every time I pushed back, I admitted quietly, I got punished for it. Linda did not answer immediately. That silence told me more than sympathy ever could. She knew it was true. Across the room, Vanessa stood near the hallway arguing quietly with Richard Barlow, while several homeowners openly stared now instead of pretending not to notice. Carol Finley crossed her arms tightly. Marty Benson shook his head, once like somebody realizing an old rumor suddenly made sense. The atmosphere had changed completely. Not outrage anymore. Calculation. People were mentally reviewing every fine, every violation notice, every strange rule Vanessa enforced over the years. Then Richard Barlow walked directly toward me. The room actually quieted when he stopped beside my chair. "Mr. Holloway," he said professionally, "do you possess additional documentation regarding the storage arrangement?" Vanessa immediately stepped forward. "Richard, this does not need to become adversarial." That word almost made me smile. Need. Like she still controlled what this was becoming. I reached calmly into my jacket and handed him a folded packet I assembled that afternoon after leaving the county office. Delivery manifests. Time-stamped photographs. Certified copies of violation notices Vanessa issued against me while her inventory occupied the garage. Plus one more thing. Insurance language from the Homeowners Association policy outlining mandatory disclosure requirements for commercial operations affecting shared residential liability. Richard read the first page standing there. Then the second. His expression changed by maybe 5%. For attorneys, that is practically panic. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "did you issue compliance penalties against this homeowner while simultaneously using his property for undisclosed business storage?" Nobody spoke. Rain pounded harder overhead. Somewhere outside, a pickup truck door slammed shut in the parking lot. Vanessa folded her arms tightly now, abandoning the polished posture entirely. "This community depends on standards," she snapped. If Derek had simply cooperated privately, none of this would have escalated. There it was. The real philosophy underneath everything. Compliance mattered more than fairness. Public control mattered more than truth. Ted Mercer stared at her in disbelief. "You find him over conditions you created?" Vanessa looked around the room like she still expected authority alone to rescue her. But residents were no longer avoiding eye contact. They were avoiding hers. Richard Barlow closed the document packet slowly. "The association may now face material exposure if residents argue selective enforcement or undisclosed liability practices," he said carefully. Material exposure. Hearing an attorney say that inside a room full of homeowners was like smelling smoke inside a theater. Panic spreads fast after that. And the worst part for Vanessa was this was no longer just about me reclaiming my garage. The entire neighborhood had started wondering whether their HOA president had quietly endangered all of them to protect her own side business. The meeting never officially ended after that. It just slowly collapsed under the weight of people realizing they had trusted the wrong person for too long. Nobody shouted. That was the strange part. The silence inside the clubhouse became worse than yelling could have been. Rain drummed steadily over the roof while residents sat frozen in folding chairs staring at Vanessa Whitmore like they were seeing her clearly for the first time. Richard Barlow gathered his papers without another word and quietly told the board he would be recommending immediate internal review regarding liability disclosure practices. Then he left Vanessa sitting alone at the front table. Alone. That had never happened before. Usually people orbited her, agreed with her, deferred to her. Now homeowners physically avoided standing near her as conversations broke into tense little groups around the room. Carol Finley refused to even look in Vanessa's direction while whispering sharply with two neighbors near the coffee station. Ted Mercer walked outside into the rain and never came back in. Linda Harper stayed seated with both hands folded tightly together like she was trying to stop herself from shaking. Vanessa noticed all of it. You could see the panic beginning behind her eyes, even though she kept trying to maintain that polished HOA president posture. "People are overreacting," she finally said into the room, voice thinner now. Nobody answered. That silence hit her harder than confrontation would have. Outside, fog rolled low across the retention pond behind the clubhouse parking lot, while cold wind pushed rain sideways under the streetlights. I stepped onto the covered walkway to breathe for a minute, and found Marty Benson standing there with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, watching water collect along the muddy shoreline near the drainage ditch. "You know," he muttered quietly, "my wife got fined $200 last year because our mailbox flowers were the wrong color." He laughed once under his breath. Bitter sound. "Flowers." Another resident joined us. Then another. Slowly, people started telling stories out loud they had apparently been carrying around for years. Selective fines, public shaming, threats over landscaping. Vanessa showing up uninvited to inspect garages. Residents nodded grimly while rainwater tapped against aluminum gutters overhead and thunder rolled somewhere deeper across the lake. It felt less like gossip and more like survivors comparing damage after a storm. Through the clubhouse windows, I could still see Vanessa sitting alone at the board table, checking her phone repeatedly. Nobody approached her anymore. At one point, she looked directly toward the covered walkway, where half a dozen residents now stood talking quietly with me instead of her. That expression on her face changed everything for me. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. Because social authority is addictive once somebody gets used to controlling a community, and Vanessa could feel it slipping away in real time. She suddenly stood and walked outside into the rain toward us. Nobody moved to meet her. Nobody smiled. Even Carol Finley turned away when Vanessa approached. This neighborhood will regret turning routine governance into public spectacle, Vanessa said tightly, trying one last time to sound authoritative. Marty Benson stared at her for several seconds before answering. Routine governance, he said quietly. You stored business inventory in another man's garage while fining him for it. Vanessa opened her mouth immediately, but nothing came out. The silence after that was brutal. Just rain, wind, water moving through the drainage ditch near the parking lot. Then Linda Harper stepped outside holding an envelope in one hand. Vanessa, she said carefully, not unkindly. The board is requesting temporary suspension of your enforcement authority pending legal review. Nobody reacted loudly. No dramatic gasps. But the emotional shift hit the entire walkway like pressure breaking before a storm. Vanessa looked around at the residents surrounding her and realized nobody was stepping forward to defend her. Not one person. Vanessa stood there in the rain holding that suspension envelope like it physically offended her existence. Water rolled off the shoulders of her cream coat while residents slowly drifted farther away beneath the covered walkway. Not dramatically, not cruelly, but with the quiet instinct people have when they suddenly realize standing too close to somebody might become dangerous socially or legally. That kind of isolation hits harder in suburban neighborhoods than open hostility ever could. Blackwater Pines had spent years orbiting Vanessa Whitmore's approval. Now nobody wanted to be seen defending her. The wind coming off Miller's Lake pushed cold fog across the parking lot in slow waves while thunder rolled deeper across the shoreline beyond the clubhouse retention pond. Vanessa looked directly at Linda Harper. You cannot suspend elected authority over gossip and emotional reactions, she said tightly. Linda held her ground, though barely. This is not gossip anymore. Before Vanessa could answer, headlights swept across the parking lot. A county vehicle rolled slowly through the rain and stopped near the clubhouse entrance. Nobody spoke. Even the storm seemed quieter for a second. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out wearing a dark county inspection jacket, carrying a leather portfolio beneath one arm. Richard Barlow closed his eyes briefly under the covered awning like somebody watching a manageable problem become catastrophic in real time. The county inspector introduced himself as Daniel Reeves from Franklin County Zoning Compliance. Calm voice. Mid-50s. The kind of man who probably spent 30 years walking into bad situations nobody else wanted to touch. I apologize for the late hour, he said professionally, but we received a request for preliminary review regarding undisclosed commercial inventory activity tied to this address. Every resident on that walkway turned toward Vanessa at once. Not me. Her. Vanessa immediately straightened her posture again, like muscle memory kicked in under pressure. This is a misunderstanding being weaponized by emotional residents, she said sharply. Reeves nodded once without reacting. Possibly, he answered calmly. That is what reviews are for. That line landed beautifully because suddenly her usual intimidation tactics meant absolutely nothing. County officials do not care about HOA politics. They care about liability exposure, insurance classifications, permit disclosures, and documentation trails. Vanessa sensed the power shift immediately. I was never informed this had escalated beyond internal governance, she said, voice tightening again. Reeves looked at her over the top of his glasses. Ma'am, once residential properties become associated with undisclosed commercial inventory operations, internal governance stops being the only concern. Silence again. Brutal silence. Carol Finley quietly whispered something to Marty Benson, and both of them stared openly at Vanessa now, with that specific expression people get when years of intimidation suddenly start looking ridiculous instead of frightening. Then Reeves asked the question that finally broke her composure completely. Can you confirm whether homeowner insurance disclosures were updated after inventory operations expanded onto adjacent residential property? Vanessa hesitated. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But long enough. Reeves wrote something down immediately. I watched her notice the movement of his pen, and for the first time since all this started, Vanessa Whitmore looked genuinely overwhelmed. Rainwater dripped steadily from the clubhouse roof, while fog curled across the wet pavement around our shoes. Nobody moved closer to her. Nobody interrupted to defend her explanations anymore. Even Ted Mercer stayed near the edge of the parking lot pretending to study his phone rather than stand beside the woman he spent years voting with. That was the real collapse. Not the suspension. Not the county review. The social abandonment. Vanessa finally looked toward me directly across the covered walkway. Are you happy now? She asked quietly, anger cracking beneath exhaustion. I held her stare for a moment before answering. I wanted my garage back. That answer hit harder than any speech could have, because everybody standing there knew this disaster started with something unbelievably simple. A woman who thought power meant she could take whatever she wanted from people too afraid to stop her. 3 weeks later, my garage finally belonged to me again. Not legally. It had always legally been mine. But emotionally, that took longer. The county review moved faster than anyone expected after Daniel Reeves filed his preliminary findings. Once insurance disclosure failures entered the conversation, everything around Vanessa Whitmore started collapsing at once. Her staging clients began pulling contracts. The Homeowners Association suspended all enforcement actions pending independent review. 2 board members resigned quietly before the month ended. Richard Barlow withdrew as association counsel the same afternoon the carrier requested documentation regarding undisclosed commercial operations tied to residential inventory overflow. That phrase spread through Blackwater Pines like smoke through dry timber. Undisclosed commercial operations. Suddenly, every conversation at the community mailbox stopped when Vanessa walked up. Residents who once rushed to greet her now found reasons to check their phones or stare at the ground. Nobody wanted proximity to the scandal anymore. I saw her one morning outside the subdivision entrance standing alone beside her white SUV while cold fog drifted low over the retention pond and lake wind rattled dead leaves across the wet pavement. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Socially. Like somebody whose authority disappeared so completely the neighborhood itself no longer knew where to place her. She noticed me pulling out of my driveway and started walking toward my truck before stopping halfway. I never intended for this to spiral, she said quietly through the cold morning air. No performance left. No polished manipulation. Just exhaustion. I rested one arm on the open window frame for a second listening to rainwater drip from pine branches overhead. You kept taking more because nobody stopped you, I answered calmly. Vanessa looked away first. That mattered more than I expected. The actual removal of her inventory happened on a gray Thursday morning under steady courthouse rain that turned the subdivision roads slick and reflective beneath the clouds. 2 rental trucks backed into my driveway, while workers carried out the last of the staging furniture, storage bins, and decorative junk that had swallowed my workshop for nearly a year. Nobody from the neighborhood came over to help her, but people watched, quietly from porches, through kitchen windows, beside mailboxes. Blackwater Pines had become a neighborhood that finally understood silence could protect the wrong people for far too long. By noon, the garage stood empty except for dust outlines where her inventory used to sit. I stayed there alone for a while after the trucks left, listening to rain tap softly against the metal roof. The place smelled wrong at first. Damp cardboard still lingering underneath mildew and stale fabric. But underneath all of it, faint and familiar, I caught the smell of cedar again. Then motor oil. Then sawdust. My workshop coming back to life one breath at a time. I spent the next several days rebuilding it slowly. Tools back on pegboards. Workbench cleared. Old shop radio plugged in again beside the vise my father installed 20 years earlier. The first night, I rolled the Silverado back inside. I just sat there in silence holding a warm coffee thermos while fog drifted beyond the backyard fence line toward Miller's Lake. No HOA notices on the garage door. No inventory stacked to the ceiling. No fluorescent orange warnings waiting in the mailbox. Just quiet. Real quiet. The kind that feels earned after months of pressure finally leave your chest. People in Blackwater Pines started waving at me again after that. Not dramatically. Small things. Marty Benson bringing over fresh walleye from the fishing docks. Carol Finley apologizing for believing rumors. Even Linda Harper stopped by one evening with revised board documentation reversing every violation Vanessa issued against my property. But the strangest part came later. About 2 months after everything settled, I received a certified letter from Franklin County requesting additional information regarding several storage locations connected to Vanessa Whitmore's staging business outside our subdivision. Apparently, my garage had not been the only property involved. I remember standing there at the mailbox under cold evening wind reading that letter while thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the lake shoreline. Then I looked back toward my garage glowing warm against the fog and realized something simple. Some people mistake silence for weakness until the day the truth finally starts making noise.